Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Really happy to have everyone here. Thanks for joining us, Kim. This is our third webinar of the Connecting Learning with Earning series. This is a webinar series that was specifically designed for Baobab mentorship participants. So we're really excited to offer you brand new content related to research based on the requests of our mentorship participants. This webinar is also in promotion of a brand new course on Baobab called Intro to Research Methods that we will tell you a little bit about later. So without further ado, I would like to present our panelists and presenters today. We have Dr. Yako, who is a PhD. He's an Iraqi-American anthropologist and writer. His work for the last 12 years has primarily been in higher education, in designing courses, teaching, and acting as an academic and career advisor at multiple U.S. universities. Dr. Yako is committed to supporting students in thoughtful and creative ways that guide them to reach their full potential, overcome obstacles, and get fulfillment in their lives. He holds a BA in English from College of Languages at Baghdad University, a Master's of English from Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, and a PhD in Cultural Anthropology from Duke University in North Carolina. As a social scientist, Lewis focuses on higher education in the Middle East and has conducted extensive research at public and private universities in the region. Dr. Yako has taught and worked with American and international academic institutions and NGOs for many years, and he's the author of 2 books and many articles on various topics. So we're excited to have him. We also have Dr. Pauline Wambua, who received her PhD in Education Policy and Master of Public Policy from Michigan State University. She also holds a Master's in Development Studies from the University of Nairobi, Kenya. Her teaching and research interests focus on education development in African contexts, particularly inequalities of access and learning, education policy, and policy analysis. Dr. Wambua has robust experience in mixed methods and quantitative methods, and she's led and co-led domestic and international research projects, analyzed data from qualitative and qualitative data from large projects, and supervised multiple research teams. She works with the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program and e-learning initiative, where she's part of an interdisciplinary team focused on the project's monitoring, evaluating, and research and learning activities, and coordinates with co-implementing partners and participating institutions on data collection, analysis, and reporting. And we also have Sandra Nabulega with us. She is a Baobab scholar and is pursuing a master's degree in learning sciences at Arizona State University. She has a bachelor's degree in statistics from Mekere University in Uganda. So this is our panel for today. We're excited. We have a lot of material to go over. So without further ado, I'll hand it to you, Dr. Yako.
Well, good day to everybody. And thank you for being with us today. And thank you so much, Tiffany, for this very kind and helpful introduction for all of us. We appreciate you helping us with this today and moderating this. So let's begin, because we have so much to cover today. And I just want a few things to share before I talk about the agenda. Feel free to share your thoughts, your ideas, your questions in chat at any time while we're having the discussions and the presentations. We will also have time at the end for questions and answers, and we will do our best to answer all the questions that you have, including the ones that you post in chat. But also we will have polls in which we will ask you to participate and write a couple sentences, 2-3 sentences, and that would be a great way for us to also continue the conversation and hear your thoughts as we go in this presentation. So again, you're welcome here with us. And the agenda for today will be as follows. We will begin by simply defining research methods in simple terms. And then we will talk about what are some of the most common terminologies used in the research methods world, if you will. And probably many of you will know these things, but I think just, presenting and sharing them and have simple, straightforward definitions could be a very good starting point for those who are still in their early career, in their early research stages, and they would like sometimes just to have that clarity. We will talk about the life cycle of research project, of basically a typical research project. But of course, as you know, this could vary from research to another. This would be kind of a classic basic research cycle. We will then talk about quantitative versus qualitative methods, what they are. And then we will talk about how do we select the proper method for the research that we're trying to do, and how do we utilize the data collection tools that we have, especially nowadays where we have a lot of different kind of tools. And we will talk about the process of analyzing, interpreting, and synthesizing data. And then we will talk about research ethics and integrity. And we will close before the questions and answers with our dear colleague Sandra, who will tell us about the forthcoming course, the Baobab forthcoming course on Intro to Research Methods. Now, I just want to say that obviously we are not going to be able to cover everything in depth, but this is a starting point to encourage you to also go to the course when it comes out, but also a point for you to start thinking about questions and digging deeper on your own as researchers or at whichever stage you are. So I feel that's an important clarification, because we know, and I'm sure all of you know, that a lot of this material is too much. There's a lot to say about every single item. So what we will do, we will try to just sort of talk about them in more like simple terms, basic terms that are important, but should lead you to others. I think every good webinar does not have a final word. It should actually open other doors into other inquiries for everybody. So welcome, and let's begin. We will begin by hearing from you, of course, and hearing your thoughts with the poll. And the question here is, what do you wish to learn about research methods? I mean, you are here and we're happy you're here. What do you wish to learn in this webinar and in the future? Or in the future? Just a couple sentences, because for us, it's a great way to see your direction, your thoughts on this. Feel free to share that in chat, please. And we'll be, commenting, Pauline and I, as you write. Great. Different methods, yes. Data collection and analysis, yeah. Well, as you saw in the agenda, we are going to talk a little bit about both of these. In literature review methods, okay, wow, literature review, that's that's a big one, and techniques. Ethnography, wow, fantastic. That's anthropology. That's one of my favorite things. Qualitative methods of analysis and quantitative techniques also, yes. Understand the entire process of research method, yes, very good. Methodologies, what a career in research looks like. Okay, that's great, and we should talk about that in the question and answer point. So I hope that the person who's talking about the career options will make sure to answer that also at some point, definitely in the question and answer, because it's a very important point for all of you, I'm sure. Which research methods to use and when to use them? Very good, fantastic. Writing a research paper. We may not cover all of these things, but we're very happy to hear from you, because that could help us, especially now we are still in the process of finalizing the course that we're creating. So this could be also good feedback for us to hear what you're thinking about. Selection of appropriate research design and models, very good. Literature review. So I'm seeing there are certain things that a lot of you are interested in, and they're really fantastic and very, very good points. So thank you so much for sharing them with us. How to get a researchable topic. Well, any topic can be researchable, right? It depends on how passionate you are and how you frame the questions, because half of every research is to ask, I think, really good and right questions, like that are really important. So that's something that depends on what you're interested in and how you frame the questions. But a really good point, of course. Fantastic. So thank you for sharing these thoughts. We just wanted a minute to hear from you. We're going to go into the next slide and begin our journey. So the first thing is basically, what is research in very simple basic terms? Because I know we all come from different fields, research different things, and fields compete with each other sometimes, and some people want to pretend that they are better than others. But today, some people want to say they have more rigor. Some people want to say, oh, we are deeper, we're more wonderful. But today we live in a world that is what is called inter-cross multidisciplinary, which means disciplines can be interrelated and they can cross each other's. And then we should also think about multidisciplines as we think about questions, because if we don't do that, we end up with a very narrow focus that can ignore a lot of other ways and a lot of other things that are happening and be discovered in other disciplines, right? And so it's really important to always think in inter-cross multidisciplinary method. So research is a process of systematic inquiry that is designed to collect information depending on what you're asking and what you want to get at, and analyze. You analyze and think about what you collected and interpret it very carefully, and then use that data to sort of share your findings, and of course write everything and how you did the whole thing. In simple terms, this is what research is. Now, what are research methods? Research methods are the strategies, processes, and techniques that we utilize in the collection of data. There are many ways and methods we can use in order to collect our data and the information, right? So collection of data, or the evidence that we want, or the way we get the evidence for analysis in order to uncover new information or create better understanding of any topic or question. So in simple terms, this is what research methods is. Again, I know many of you know that, but sometimes just having this clarity can help us. It can remind us about some of the basics that are easy to get lost in the details. So next, we will talk about, we selected just a few terminologies that you see a lot. As you know, there are so many terminologies that you will hear, but some of the most common ones that you would hear, we're not going to talk in depth about each one of them, obviously, because then you're going to be bored and leave us. We don't want you to leave us. But very quickly, we thought these are some terminologies that you encounter very often. So for example, methods, what kind of methods we use, data, the kind of information we collect, the different forms of information, and that data could vary if you're doing quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods, right? Analysis, how do you analyze the information you have? Bias, how our systems of beliefs and values and experiences affect how we think, collect, and interpret the data. So that's called bias. And everybody has different. In many ways, we are the product of everything that we've encountered, everything that has ever happened to us. So that everything that has ever happened to us affects how we approach a question, how we ask a question, how we decide who to interview, what data matters, and sadly, how to cut voices and sometimes ignore, and sometimes, unintentionally have this negligence. We are all humans and we have the blind spots. So bias always exists there. But what matters is for us to be aware and to even acknowledge what we could have done better, or what somebody else could take after us to do, because no research has a final word. No project is the final thing. Everything should be opening doors and questions for other. I remember a writer who beautifully puts it that any piece of work that doesn't end with any question you write about, that doesn't end with at least 2 more questions, it's probably not very valuable. That opens 2 other questions for others to explore. Now, this is not 100% applicable in every situation, but research should open doors, not close the doors and have the final word, right? Case studies, how do we study a specific subject and what do we know about it and study it in depth? Data analysis, analyzing the information. Quantitative, qualitative, we'll talk more about them later. Mixed methods as well. Ethics, very similar to the idea of what kind of values and beliefs we're using, ethical things we're using in order to do the research. Evaluation, how do we evaluate what we have, the information? What evidence do we use? What evidence do we have, and why it matters, and how do we present it, and how did we get to it? And then hypothesis, basically it's a starting point. You have a hypothesis, a way of thinking about this might be the case here. So let's find out. I'm gonna ask my colleague Pauline to also talk about the other concepts and terminologies we see a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise. And once again, we are just mentioning them in passing. You can study so much and learn them much more, and we are happy to answer any questions. So when you are conducting any research, you have to get informed consent. That is, the participants have to voluntarily agree to be part of the study, and they should be able to stop at any particular time. And also we have variables. You have different aspects that characteristics that have to vary. For example, when you talk of gender, outcomes, and for example, I've said like gender or education outcomes. Those are different variables. Examples of variables. And when you are collecting, before you partake any study, it has to be approved by the institutional review board. In some places, they use the research permit. So you have to get the research permit either from your university, your college, or sometimes at the government level. And then we have investigation and investigators. So these are the people who are doing the study and the aspect of doing it. Then outputs and different outcomes. These are just like the final thing that you are going to get, and the different materials that you'll have to use. Primary and secondary data, we'll also talking briefly about that, but primary data is the one that you collect as the investigator, but secondary data is what has been already collected by somebody else, and you have to use it. You have to use what is already existing. Then you can't, again, talk to everybody. So you have to do what we call sampling, which is just the method or process of choosing the people you are going to talk to, or your study participants and stakeholders, anyone who is involved or might be affected by the program or the study that you are carrying out. And then we have experiments. Even in social sciences, there are experiments. It's not only in sciences whereby you do a randomized controlled trial. So that's an example of an experiment. What we mean by experiment. So interviewer, interviewee, the person who is asking the questions is the interviewer, your participant is the interviewee. Then reliability and validity. This is also a big topic that people can study and learn more. And so, for example, when you talk of reliability, for example, the tool that you are measuring really measures what it intends to measure. Are you like, for the way you are defining different terms, are you getting the exact thing that you intend to measure? And then validity, we also have two different types of validity. We have internal and external validity. External validity is whereby the study can be generalized to other population, to other settings. And internal validity is whether the way the research is designed is doing whatever it is supposed to do. But it is a big topic. Then study sample, population and sample, it's related to sampling. So study population is everybody who can be included, and sample is the people who, the small group that you talk to. And generalization is whether the findings can be applied to other settings. It's not just around the study area. Yeah, so thank you. So moving on to the next one and to answer any questions.
Well, somebody Joseph asks, how does sampling and qualitative differ from quantitative studies? Pauline, do you have something quick to say about this point?
Yes.
While we're in the heat of it, yeah.
Yeah, I would say it is very, very different. First, we are going to talk a little bit about that as well. Qualitative sampling is the numbers are very small, and you can choose as a researcher based on, like, for example, we have purposive sampling where you sample based on a certain characteristic, and they are usually small numbers. For quantitative studies, there is usually a formula that you use to calculate the sample based on the sample size that you need, the study population. So there's always like a formula to sample and like to get that particular sample size, and again it depends on different things, and there are different types of sampling that unfortunately we are not covering here, but we're happy to answer any questions on different methods of types of sampling, like random sampling, stratified sampling, and all those other types, purposive sampling. But it is very different, because quantitative is small numbers, quantitative is large numbers, qualitative you need just small numbers to talk to.
Exactly. So I see another question. We'll get to it later. So you, again, a reminder, you all feel free to write your questions and we will get to them as we speak. And if you see them answered, then that's great. If not, we'll do our best to give them their fair share of time. A typical life cycle of a research, what does it consist of? The most important thing about any research is to identify and this is also difficult, of course. It's important and difficult, not easy to do. Just like in writing, one of the most difficult things is to put the first line on paper, right? But then once you put that, things start unfolding. And as you write, or as you think, or as you brainstorm, you discover. So writing is not only, even with a research, and by the way, I would say even if it's creative, writing is not only to write what you know. You begin from a certain point of knowing into discovering things you never thought will unfold as you write. That happens a lot, particularly in creative writing. But with research, even if you collect data and do research and review the literature review, once you begin writing and putting them together, you find yourself going to places you never thought that you would end up doing or discovering, right? And so that also applies in kind of research we do. So that's why the first step of identifying and focusing is really important, asking the right questions. And there's no formula. Like there's no somebody sitting on chair and say, oh, your question is right. No, yours is not right. It all depends on what matters to you and what really you feel needs to be discovered. The African-American novelist Toni Morrison beautifully said something that I think applies to every research and every creative project. She said, if there is a book that you really want to read and it has not been written yet, write it. I think that's a great formula. If there's anything you really want to see there, discovered, written about, explored, and nobody has done it, go ahead and do it. That would be a great question to start. But as long as you're able to prove and to show that you've done your work, you've read what has been said or what has not been said about it, and so on. So identifying is really important. Conducting literature review. Some of you already talked about literature review. Basically, it means in simple ways to read what has been written about or researched about any given topic or any given question. Now, that's a very interesting process because, if you are interested in researching X, that doesn't mean you only read about X. You should read about anything related and surrounding X that might affect X directly or indirectly, so that you can see what kind of literature is there, what has been said. And the more you refine your questions and what you want to focus on, the more you'll be able to sort of decide what kind of literature you need to review, what matters out there. And sometimes there isn't enough literature, or there isn't any literature yet on the topic or the particular angle. And that's what makes your research original and important. That's a very important thing, right? So conducting a literature review matters a lot. And I strongly advise, based on experience and reading, because I've read so many bad academic books out there. There are so many bad ones, right? And I think a lot of you know this very well, those who have a relationship with academic books. But my biggest advice is that do not make your research project eventually just sort of recycling all the literature review or secondary data that is there. You should tell us what is being written only to pave the way to what you want to say. What are you finding? What is important? So that's what literature review should serve. So going to the third point, you develop, refine, and focus your research questions. And I already talked a good deal about this, about why questions matter. Because if the premise, the foundation of your question is flawed, if you're not asking the right question, then sadly, it could have a domino effect in everything else you do. And I think that applies to life itself. In life, when we don't ask the right questions, we could go to a whole different direction, right? So research is very much a form of life in a way, I think, as those of you who are passionate about will know that. There's also research ethics, training, and gaining. How do you think about the ethics and the things that what to consider when you interview people, their privacy, their confidentiality? Are they going to be in danger? Tell them always their rights, that you have a right to participate, you have a right to say no later and change your mind, and then I have to delete your data and not use it because you don't want it. All kinds of ethics surrounding it, but also your own ethics. How did you collect the data? Were you sincere? Did you really cover all the bases that you need to cover? And we're all humans, we have biases and so on, right? So I love the idea that because of we're humans, we have flaws and blind spots. It's very hard for us to be purely impartial, but it is possible to be sincere. And by that, I mean, you're very sincere in saying, I did this and this and that. I could have done this, but I didn't have time, or I didn't have the resources. I should have done this, but it's beyond my scope. That's to be sincere. So I think the word sincere is key in any good research, as it is in any kind of writing. I always connect the bigger picture, right? Permissions that you need to do the research. We will talk about this, and we'll talk also about the ethics. My colleague Pauline will be talking a little bit more at length later, so I don't want to dwell more on it right now. Identifying appropriate research methods. Some of you already talked about this. How do you find the right method, right? And so that depends on the questions and what you want to find out, and how much time you have, how much resources you have or need. So there's all these considerations that could help you, and even access. For example, during COVID, people couldn't go to the field. So they had, in my field, for example, of anthropology, they had to resort to what we call digital ethnography, doing anthropology by doing digital sort of access to things, right? So it all depends on multiple factors, and these factors should be determined by you. You're the best person to decide what kind of factors. Data collection, how do you collect the data? And that's another key thing in the life cycle of your research. You go and collect data. And again, the kind of data that you need will be determined by all the previous steps, especially the questions, but also what needs to be done. What has been done is fine, but sometimes you could read a literature review and discover that there are flaws even in the literature produced already. So you could find another angle or another way to complement it. So then you could continue collecting data that somebody else should have, but didn't. The point is, you decide based on multiple factors, based on the research project in your hands. Data analysis, and this is where the role of the researcher becomes extremely serious. I mean, it is serious the whole time, but how do you analyze it? How do you find patterns? What is emerging? And I speak more of qualitative because it's really an area I've worked much more. But again, my colleague Pauline, who's very experienced with quantitative, she will be talking to us also later in the webinar about this. But the analyzing data is extremely important, because you have to know a lot of factors, and you have to have a lot of critical tools and critical thinking and creativity to be able to find patterns. What keeps coming up? Which word has been? I noticed that 60 participants I talked about mentioned the word mentioned the phrase of I'm afraid of being fired. Or many people I talked to mentioned the word resilience. Why this word resilience keep coming up? So if you really have a sharp eye for detail as a qualitative researcher, you'll say, of the 60, 35 mentioned resilience. This means this word means something. Let me find out. Let me follow the life of that word. Where does it come from? So that's research. Qualitative, you follow the life of what keeps emerging. You follow the story, the genealogy of things, right? Not only how things are, but how they became the way they are, as the French philosopher Michel Foucault tells us, right? The genealogy of things. And then writing, which is a process that differs from project to project and from person to person, how you do it, and then sharing your findings. This is the typical life cycle. I won't be saying more because of time, but I hope this is a good way for all of you just to have, again, that clarity and putting things in perspective for some of you, at least. Next, we will talk about
yeah, thank you so much, Luis. As we move on, there are a few questions in the chat and the question and answer. The ones around qualitative and quantitative research, we are going to talk about that one more. Unfortunately, we are not covering theoretical framework in details in this particular webinar, but thank you for raising it. It's something we can consider for future webinars. And also a question on whether it's a must to have literature review in any research. Yes, I would say that is, you can't avoid that. You must have a literature review, because whatever you are working on, you have to ground it on a certain literature, and again, to help you justify why you are doing it and the research gap that you are trying to cover. And then questions around the hypothesis, the theoretical framework, and literature review. So hypothesis is it's like a guess what is, and this is mainly in quantitative research. what you think the outcome would be before you start. For example, you can have hypotheses like in education that students in rural areas perform less or perform poorly than those in urban areas. So you have that. Then when you go to analyze the data, that is something you want to see if you are supporting that hypothesis. And again, we'll be able to share this webinar later. And then tools around data analysis, I think we'll cover those ones more a little bit later. And I know we are running less on time, so I think we'll just continue. Then we'll cover the rest later. Thank you.
Yeah. And here, thank you very much, Pauline. I really, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for actually also sort of engaging with some of the questions that are coming, because that also helps us in not letting them, go in these different comments, but also later we'll have chance for other questions to be addressed. So quantitative, qualitative are some of the key methods that we hear all about, and I will briefly talk about qualitative, and then Pauline will talk about quantitative. Qualitative is a method of research that produces descriptive, which is mostly non-numerical, but you could turn that into numerical, by the way. I want to say that, depending on how many you do and how you want to sort of later translate your findings. But it's descriptive data, such as observations, behavior, or personal accounts of experience. The goal of gathering this kind of data, the goal of gathering the qualitative is to examine how individuals perceive the world from different viewpoints and different experiences, how different experiences create different ways of seeing the world. So a variety of techniques are used in qualitative research, are deployed usually. They include content analysis of the narratives that you collect, the narratives that you gather, as well as in-depth interviews. You can also do focus groups and participant observation, which means you're there participating in the events and observing how they happen, as well as case studies and that are conducted usually with depending on the setting that you need. So some of the key ways of doing qualitative include interviews, and interviews could be formal or semi-formal. They could be open-ended or with very specific questions, and or you can rotate. It all depends on your questions and what you want to find out. And both have pros and cons. Open-ended questions can make you discover things you never thought about, right? But sometimes to keep a focus, you can always go back and ask a more pointed question. So focus groups, you bring groups together and see how they interact with each other, how they share together. Although individuals, when they're alone with you, they can share things that could be also meaningful in their own way. So you have to do all kinds of different things and evaluations to decide what you really need and what you're learning from each of these. Observation, and of course, participant observation is key in social sciences and anthropology particularly, and the idea that you go and be there in the field. Now, sometimes the field is affected by your presence, and that's why it matters when you're directly in the event or when you're observing it from far away. You find very different things, because sometimes when you talk to me, you behave in a certain way, but when you talk to your neighbor, you behave in a very different way. And so observation has all kinds of techniques and ways of doing it so that you get more results. And document analysis, which is also very important for qualitative, which means that you look at documents and analyze them. And it's very close to the literature review idea. Moving to quantitative, and I'll let my colleague Pauline talk about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise. So quantitative is mainly deals with numerical data. So it's mainly the process of collecting and analyzing numerical data. So without going into further details about it, we have what we have here is mainly some of the methods that you use to collect that numerical data. Under surveys, we have some are web-based. For example, nowadays there are a lot of online surveys that people do, or in other places, especially maybe in the developed countries, whereby people get them through mail or post office, and then you are able to respond to them. Then you have a question. Obviously, in all these ones, we must have a questionnaire. Sometimes you can do face-to-face interviewing to fill in the questionnaire. You can call your participants and answer them by phone or through computer-assisted personal interviewing, where you use the software with the computer to help you with the data collection, to fill out the questionnaire. And then the experiments, especially those who are doing a randomized controlled trials. They also have a processes whereby they collect the numerical data to compare, and then they compare that between different groups. Yeah, so that's what I will say about the quantitative methods here. Thank you.
Dr. Wambua, one question that's related to this, the difference quickly between interviews and surveys.
Okay,
Yeah, I think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say like they kind of for the surveys here, what we have here, like you've seen in the differences, it's mainly like whereby you send it out. It could be online or mail. Then when you're talking about a survey, an interview, mainly you can have like, I know in different places we use like, we are going to do a survey, but we have a questionnaire that we are trying to answer. So for interviews, it's whereby now you have the interviewer, interviewee interaction, and then you have a questionnaire that maybe has several questions that you are supposed to fill out. Maybe the way we put it, it's not different. It's not that super different, but that is what I can say about that.
Thank you.
And a quick note, for some people said that on the slide, it's the qualitative is under quantitative and vice versa. You are right. I'm sorry. The ones on the left are qualitative, on the right were quantitative, just to clarify that. I thought I corrected, I changed the location yesterday, but maybe it didn't save. So thank you for noting, and I'm sorry about the glitch, which I know I did it yesterday. I switched the titles, but somehow I don't see it reflected, and sorry for that. Again, my colleague Pauline will be talking about the slide.
Yes, so here, and we are also happy to answer any questions. Just in brief, how they do the different methods vary. The first one is about the aim. Like for the quantitative one, you are aiming to count things or to get like, it's mainly numerical. And sorry for repeating that, but you are mainly aiming to count things. But for qualitative, it is descriptive. It is the why. It is the why part of like every what you want to study, or the particular observation, and around the purpose. Quantitative, you can generalize, but they are mainly sometimes it's relationships, unless like things like experiments where you can be sure to say that this one causes the other one. But in qualitative, about the purpose, it's just that you have to understand the context, contextualization, and the interpretation of different perspectives. For the tools that you use, like again, there we've talked about that, is surveys to collect the numerical data. And then the other one, you have an instrument, and it's mainly an interview guide, whereby and when you are collecting the data, it's mainly like you're having a conversation. Once you start conversation, you're also encouraged to probe things that come up. And then it's usually unstructured for qualitative, but quantitative, it is super structured. You're trying to answer and respond to like a certain maybe checklist or a list of questions. And for the output, again, quantitative is mainly numbers. The other one is mainly the stories, then the words. Sometimes people do pictures and different objects. And then moving on to the other, the other one we talked about sample. For quantitative, it's usually smaller, large samples, mainly selected randomly, or if you have other justification of the method that you are using, but it's usually large samples. Qualitative, they are usually small numbers of respondents. And again, under the objective, and again, these things are kind of repeating in one way or another. The objective for the quantitative, mainly measurements and analyzing. The other one is it is mainly objective. The other one is subjective, especially when it comes to interpreting and analyzing the qualitative data. We can have the same data, but Louise and I write different stories, because whatever the way we're analyzing, it's the way we interpret different aspects. And the role of the researcher for the quantitative is to just remain objective. You're just focusing on answering different things. But the other one on the qualitative, it's mainly subjective. You are trying to immerse yourself as a researcher in the context of the interviewee, and then on the analysis, interpretive, qualitative, and the other one is statistical. And just to mention here that sometimes you can have mixed methods, whereby you have quantitative and then qualitative. And I saw a question on whether one informed the other. It could be either way. You can first collect qualitative data, and then that will help you in designing your questionnaire. Or sometimes you can have the questionnaire, then you have like questions that you want to understand, why are you getting certain responses? So it varies on the purpose of the research and the different aspects that the interviewer is focusing on.
Yeah.
I think.
Move on.
Great, yes, please, yeah. And now we're going to talk briefly also about the basic research categories. What kind of categories define any given research? So the first one is exploratory, and as it says, it's a research to explore something, right? And exploratory research provides better understanding of an issue that you're researching, and potentially in providing that understanding, it helps us to develop a theory regarding that issue. So you explore an issue and try to develop a theory. And just because of how this works, it usually tends to adopt qualitative approaches. But I remind you that not everything is set in stone. It depends always on the questions, and you can rotate and mix methods. But this kind really utilizes or tends to utilize qualitative methods. Confirmatory research, again, it's to confirm something. You can see from the title, it confirms a potential theory, sometimes a hypothesis, by doing empirical testing or finding out through empirical evidence. Therefore, this one, it tends to utilize the quantitative methods mostly. And then we come to something that most of you also talked about, some of you mentioned, is a mix of both of the above. And this is to build a potential theory or hypothesis, and then you test it empirically utilizing mixed method approaches. And you mix methods depending on time that you can mix certain methods in order to get to what you want. That's not to say you should do it quickly and whip up things together. It's to say that depending on what you need and depending on certain limits that you may have, you may need to mix methods. So there is no one formula that you should do this here or there. It all depends on you, what you're researching, and what your questions are, and how you are deciding to approach them. So this is very important to do it. It's quite common actually to use most methods, and methods and design approaches depends on the aims, as I said, and objectives and the questions that you have. So there isn't one answer. This is very hard to I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that, but it all depends on what you want to find. Next one, please. And here we come to selecting the most proper methods for your research. How do you decide what is the most appropriate method for you? Quantitative methods are usually measuring something, testing a hypothesis. You're testing something. So the quantitative methods tend to be very useful for that. Qualitative methods help you explore an idea or thought or meanings, what something means, going in much deeper and getting narrative about it. Secondary data, Pauline mentioned this earlier, it's to analyze a large amount of readily available data. Primary data, if you want data specific to your purposes with control over how it's generated, then you will need to collect primary data. Cause and effect relationships between different variables. So you can always experiment with methods based on what you find. And I want to say that it's really important to experiment with research. The sky is the limit, and always be innovative and creative, because that's how you get to new things. As long as you show with evidence that you have covered everything that exists and that you give a very good, compelling reasons of why you're wanting to experiment with something. But this could be really life-changing for your careers, to think and experiment always. Descriptive methods, if you want to understand the characteristics of a research project, then you would want to have more descriptive methods to show that to the readers or the findings. Sorry, again, we're being a bit brief here because of time. But what determines the methods that you will be using mostly tend to be what kind of questions and what is your goal. The goal is very important, and you will define that goal. And then also, sometimes you finish your research and the findings will tell you you need to use another method to confirm certain thing. So it's something that is really case by case. It's a very individual thing. It's very hard to say more than that. But of course, that doesn't mean you can't consult and brainstorm with colleagues and friends who know this issue to see if they can advise you also in different ways. And now we come to the second poll. My colleague Pauline will do this.
Yeah, sure. We would like to hear from you briefly, based on what you've heard, if you have any preferred method, research method, and maybe tell us why you prefer it, just maybe in 2 minutes or a minute due to time. And thank you once again for being with us so far.
Oops, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
Just looking for comments for the
I'm also checking if we have comments. Yeah, I'm seeing from Alice that they would prefer qualitative because it's easiest for me. I'm not a statistician. I think we all learn, but again, qualitative, I can say based on, maybe I could be because I'm quantitative, but I find quantitative easier because qualitative again, and none of them is easy because you are dealing here with numbers, you are running numbers, but qualitative, you have to read through, you have to make sense of everything and try to tell a story from different stories. I would love to learn quantitative. Thank you so much. Quantitative, qualitative due to limited methods, quantitative, qualitative is easy to analyze. Okay, yeah, these are really great comments. Are just nice to hear from you. But based on my experience so far, I would say there's none that is easy. Like everything varies. Others are saying a mixed method. I prefer qualitative, because I want to hear people's experiences. Yeah, that is really great. You want to learn why or certain things happen, how people are, what is happening with people. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for those. And
I saw that a lot of you are very interested in qualitative. And I want to say 2 quick things also before moving to the slide. Do not be afraid of quantitative, but also know that if you're focused on qualitative, if that's the area, qualitative can help you find blind spots and shortcomings in quantitative. And quantitative can help you cover a big territory that you may not be able to cover in qualitative as well. So both of them, they really should work hand in hand and complement each other. And it's good for us. We don't have to be masters in both, but it's good to try and to be able to be informed by both. So, I mean, as a researcher, you don't have to do everything by yourself, but what you do it well, and be informed by what others are also doing well, including if they are doing the quantitative work. Analyzing and interpreting and synthesizing data. For the qualitative, I'll be talking to you here, and then Pauline will talk more about the quantitative. So of course you have raw data, and that consists of transcripts, field notes, sometimes photographs. That's part of the data you will collect. In addition to, as I said, the field notes are key here. You write as much as you can, what you see, what you observe, what is being said. There's always things like language barriers, so you make sure you understand or have somebody who can help you understand. So that's the raw data. And then you organize it. You organize the data based on what is emerging. What patterns are you seeing in the data? And then you prepare it for analysis. And analyzing is a very important piece because you see, as I said earlier, something emerges. Many people talked about this topic. This topic keeps coming over and over. This word is being used a lot. What does it mean? And then you try to read the genealogy and the history of that word. What does that word mean for those people that you're studying? So for example, I'm doing research in Ghana, and people in Ghana keep talking about a specific word in this community. I need to understand, what does this word mean to this community? What history does it have? I need to follow that word, because the word can have a standard meaning, but it can mean something very different for a community, right? So that's what we mean by organizing and preparing your analysis. And then you're reading through your data, all of it, and try to see what are you finding as a big picture. You go back and forth. It's a dance between the big picture and the sort of zooming in on certain topics, right? I don't want to say a small picture because that's unfair also. The small picture can be really important. So I call it zooming in on something. Then you code your data, and you can use your hands. I personally have used hands for coding my data, and I had so much. I had like in my book, I worked with 63 people with in-depth interviews from different countries, right? And I had to code it all by hand, look at the themes, what emerged, and so on. But there are also computer methods nowadays that can help you do that, which is a way to save time. Softwares for organizing data, which includes things like Navivo, DDoS, and others. You see them on the screen. So if you haven't explored them, we recommend that you look at them and see if they can be useful for you. Identifying the themes and descriptions. I've mentioned this several times already. And then you interpret the meaning of these themes and descriptions, leading all into writing and the findings. Moving to the quantitative data in the next slide. And Pauline will be talking about us, Dr. Pauline.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is a big topic. People study this like throughout the semester, just about analyzing data, either quantitative or qualitative. So I think the first thing, like what next? You've collected your surveys, your questionnaires, tons of them, either online or in face-to-face. So the first thing is to prepare the data preparation, but if you're using quantitative secondary data, you start like from the second step there. But if it is your original data, you have to look at the completeness of this of the questionnaires. You have to clean it to see if there are missing data. You have to understand, like you code the data, you put it in the different softwares, you assign values. So it's a long process that maybe would take even a couple hours to explain. But you need to make the data preparation ready and work on all the missing data and ensure it is ready for analysis. So after you have the data ready, or if you're using now secondary data, you have to understand your variables and the measurements. You have what we call independent and dependent variables. The one that maybe varies based on context, and another one that doesn't vary. And measurement scales here, the way the data is organized. For example, it could be categorical or nominal, like male, female, or it could be continuous, like age, or it could be ordinal, like maybe agree, disagree, agree strongly, things like that. You have to understand, because different measurements means that data will be analyzed differently. Then you run the simple descriptives for all your variables as you try to understand the web, you understand the data. Then after that, now you go into in-depth advanced analysis, whereby you do now the correlations, t-tests, what we call analysis of variance, multiple regression. So for example, correlation is just understanding relationship between two variables. And when you talk of t-test, is whereby you are trying to check how different two variables vary. For example, do male and female academic outcomes, are they different or are they the same? When you talk of analysis of variance, it is two, like from 3 groups and above, like 2 and like you're trying to understand if 3 groups are different. Then for multiple regression, also it varies. We have also different types of multiple regression that I'm not going to mention at this point. And here is where now you are testing the hypothesis. Remember, you had said, like, for example, boys perform, or let me say, girls perform better in reading than girls, or than boys. So that is where you are testing that hypothesis and using this advanced analysis, trying to compare those differences. And then the kind of statistic that you use above there, like again, like I've mentioned, it depends on how the data is measured, the hypothesis, and the sample size. If the sample size is small, you can't use those advanced analysis. And again, here I've not put the different software. So you have like SPSS, Stata, R, and even you can use Excel sometimes. So that's just in brief, the different steps that you use for quantitative analysis. And next slide. So lastly, we are going to talk just briefly about the research ethics and integrity, and because we mentioned about that, and this should be like throughout the research process. And here we just have an example, and I think it's also clear, you can see it. So before conducting the study, like we said, you have to get permission, research permit, or the IRB. You have to get a permission from the local officials and also the participants. Once you begin the study, you have to disclose, like, to the participants and everybody else, why are you doing this study, and don't force participants to participate. They have to sign consent, like you have to get informed consent. Also, when you're collecting data, ensure you have equal treatment of all participants, respect them, don't interfere with them as they are talking through. When you're analyzing data, another big thing even for qualitative data is ensure privacy and anonymity. You don't mention people's names. And also sometimes when you analyze data, you are like, this data is not, I'm not getting what I thought. So don't try to falsify the results. And that takes me to the last example, like, avoid falsifying the data findings and conclusions, and avoid using any data that might harm participants. And also you have to store the data securely, meaning that external people should not get access to what participants told you. These are just examples, but area of ethics and integrity is super big. And sorry for going it really quickly. It's because of our time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pauline. Much appreciated. Actually, this is also important, but because you'll be getting these slides, you can spend more time on thinking about ethics and integrity. And I believe a lot of you who do research already know this, but there's also things vary from location to location and so on. So just also keep that in mind. And lastly, before we move to questions, we have the last poll for today, which we want to hear from you. What are some of the challenges that you have faced or you think you may face in your research? We would love to hear a couple sentences on that if you're able to share with us. And we will try to kind of engage with them as you write them as well, just for the sake of time. That's why I told you we can't cover everything. There's so much to be said, but we're trying our best within the limited time we have to be able to make a meaningful and useful session. We'll take just 1 minute for that. Getting a lot of information, sorting what is necessary and not maybe a challenge. Yes, you have to spend a lot of time with your data, cleaning your data and putting it together and coding. Literature review, getting authentic info. Again, with literature review, because there's so much, you shouldn't be bogged down by that. You shouldn't make that discourage you. Decide on key text or important texts that are important for you, for your questions. Not just because they say, oh, you must read this scholar, otherwise, you're not rigorous enough. Decide what is important for your questions and try to read the research that is on that. Nobody can cover everything. So don't be intimidated by literature review, I just want to say, but be strategic on choosing the literature that you will review. Finding relevant theoretical frameworks to guide my study. There are many theories out there, but also remember, theory is wherever you need it, where you find it. You can also identify and theorize. Think of yourself as a person theorizing, not only building on some theory. It's good to know them and to try to see and test them, but also think that you are also theorizing when you're thinking and writing and using information. So think of yourself as a theorist. That's also important. Ensuring interviews stay on track while answering open-ended questions. Yes, you can always interject and redirect the question. That's a technique we use a lot in anthropology. If they're going too far, sometimes being open-ended can help you because they will say things you never even thought about. But sometimes it could really be a big digression. In those cases, you can always very gently, politely bring it back and say, yes, but can you say more about this? You mentioned just a minute ago this. I would love to hear more about this. You can do it very nicely so that you don't appear dismissive or very short or not patient with them, right? Biggest challenge is maintaining the momentum. There are times when I get much into my work and along the way I lose interest. I understand. It's a process and you have to be very dedicated for it. That's why research is not only something you do academically, it's a way of life. It is work. It's a full-time job, right? Understanding what tests to use for analyzing particular type of data. Yeah, data analysis, coding the data. Data analysis requires knowing your data well, but also knowing what has been produced there and being a good interpreter of data. That takes a lot of training and critical thinking skills, right? I love that, interpreting data without bias. And you're right, this is everybody's difficulty, not just you. So no, you're not alone in this. We all have those blind spots and we may have potential bias. That's why one way to do that, interpret and write, always acknowledge what you could have done better, what you couldn't do because you didn't have time. it's okay to mention the limitations of research, and many researchers do that, right? That's your way of saying, I can't cover everything, and I'm being honest about it. Great, wonderful. There's a lot to say, but because of time, thank you so much for sharing this. We're gonna hand it to our dear colleague, Sandra, to talk about our forthcoming course, which we hope you will be joining and taking on Baobab.
Thank you. So I'll take just 1 minute of your time. So the Baobab course team is putting together a course on Intro to Research Methods. This course will have everything we've discussed here and more. I've been monitoring the chat, and there are things you've posted that we've not discussed. Those things will be in our course. And each step of the research will be its own module with hands-on experience to help you practice while learning. And stay tuned, the course will be live in May.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Sandra,
Thank
very
you,
much.
Sandra.
Thank you.
So for those of you who are able to stay just a little bit longer, we didn't have a lot of time for question and answer, but we can stay on and try and address some of the questions. Dr. Wambua, I don't know if you're able to stay on, but we're happy to do that. We have one from, we have a couple of questions from Alice. Is it always the quantitative research findings that inform the qualitative tools to be used?
Yeah, maybe I can take that one.
Yes, of
And
course.
my response will be no, it's not always. And again, you can, a researcher can always do purely qualitative research, like Dr. Yako has said, is only done qualitative research. Or you can do purely quantitative research, like I've done a couple of times. Other times you do mixed methods, whereby, and I think I also mentioned earlier that if you're doing mixed method, and again, when you're designing your questionnaires and different tools, it also should be informed by literature. You just don't wake up and write some questions down. That's why we emphasized on reviewing literature, and also even looking at similar studies to see some of the questions that are that they looked at. And so you can also, if you're using mixed methods, you, like I mentioned, you can use your qualitative work or the interviews and focus group discussions to help you design the questionnaire later. Or you can conduct a study, and after you do quantitative study, and then at the end you have questions like, why am I finding these numbers? How come this is like this? That is now you use that quantitative work to help you design interview questions to follow up on the why, or answer different questions that are not clear in your research, or you want to learn more.
And as a continuation of that, why and when would research use two methods? I think you've already touched upon that, but anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say it all depends on the way the researcher has designed the study. So based, like if you want to have like also the why, but sometimes it's always encouraged, like especially if you are quantitative researcher, to also add a qualitative part to help you answer those questions, because one shortcoming of quantitative research will tell you this is the numbers, but it doesn't tell you why. So that will be a good time to use both.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it never hurts to have qualitative and quantitative research on any topic. And as I said, they always inform each other, especially if there is a lack of one and more of the other, right? And if you know that a qualitative work is needed in this area and we don't have enough, or you think that we need more quantitative work on this and there isn't enough, because we're finding some really interesting thing with the qualitative research that we have. So all these things are determined by by these factors. You can decide.
So we have one question from Juma. I'm just going to interject really quickly for those who may need to go, that our next webinar will be on April 26th. It's a Wednesday at the same time. And the topic of that webinar will be Life as a CV with Dr. Louis Yako. So just wanted to put that out there. We have a question from Juma. Can you use survey questions in an interview, even though one is qualitative and another is quantitative?
Yes, and I think the answer would be like, if you can use survey and interview. Maybe I think maybe we brought a little bit of confusion the way we defined them. I can say like when we talked of interviews in quantitative work is the way you are collecting the data. You have a questionnaire, but for you to go and answer the questions, you have to do an interview, or like sit down with somebody and have a conversation, and then feel like what is your age, what is your income, for example, how do you likely agree or disagree? That's like we're conducting an interview, but the intention is different. It's because you want to fill in some numerical information, but for the qualitative one, we are going to have a story. You are going to get in-depth information about a certain topic. So I think maybe the way we define them, it could be different, but the way we talked about interviews in the quantitative part is mainly when you are going to collect the data. You have to have a conversation, and that conversation is what we referred to as interviews. While in the other one, you have like an interview tool, our interview guide, just a few questions, few open-ended questions where you will be like a prompt to help you guide the discussion. And then you also seek more responses based on what the participant tells you.
There was another question from Juma in the comments about interpreting data without bias and how you go about doing that, if that's even possible.
I think we talked a little bit about this throughout this webinar, which is that because we are products of everything we know, everything we're exposed to, everything that happened to us. For example, if you live through war, then you've experienced war. So what does it mean when you study war, right? So there's bias, but there's much more than that. There's the firsthand experience and many other experiences that we have. So we're all products of everything that happened to us up to the point of choosing a research. In fact, we often choose a research question, or our interesting questions could be based on things that have happened to us, you know? And that's why there's always that space for us to potentially fail to be impartial, or not to ask exactly the right questions, or not to have everything covered. And that's because we're humans. That's not because we're bad, or because we are from this country or that country or this ethnicity. It's because we're humans. And we humans, we always have blind spots and limits. And the best thing to do is to be sincere in saying what you did, how you did it. That's why there's always a section in research that I think actually is a wonderful thing to talk about. How did you do your research? I mean, usually it's the intro chapter or the first chapter if you're writing a book. What did you do? How did you do it? How did you interpret? Who did you interview? Why? You give all these reasons. In doing that sincerely, you're telling the readers what you've done and letting them find out what else could have been done, what else should be done. And as long as you always are sincere in all of that process, I think that should be fine. But then also, our experiences, the way we interpret them, and the more we read and we're exposed to the world and talk to people and gain depth, the more we reevaluate ourselves. We might think we know everything about a topic just because we lived it. So I might think I know everything about prison just because I was in prison, for example, right? But that doesn't mean I know everything. Sometimes being in the experience can also have blind spots in its own way, right? So then that's why knowledge matters and going beyond the selves. That's why understanding others is a journey into understanding ourselves, right? So I hope that kind of covers how we think about those questions. They exist. They are a challenge for all of us, without any doubt. You're not alone in them.
We have a question from Samuel. It was back at 7:30. If he's still with us, which tools can be used in data analysis? You want to comment on a couple of the tools used? I think we had that in a slide, but just to recap.
Yes, I think again we had in the slide we had some of the tools for qualitative data, but I would say for qualitative they only help you in organizing. You do all the work of coding, or the work of everything. I would say they just help you like organizing different themes in one place. We have like in Vivo, Deduce, Max QDA, Atlas TI. For quantitative research, Excel is really powerful. You can even analyze data using Excel. Maybe you need a little bit of training, but you can analyze data, even a little bit of advanced analysis using Excel. Then other popular ones for quantitative data analysis, we have SPSS, the statistical software for social program and for social sciences. And then we have another one called Stata. We have R and a few others. Those are some of the examples, but one great one, like I've mentioned, is Excel, especially if you don't have like the knowledge of how to go about these other softwares.
And
Okay.
I know we are basically out of time now, and I'm sorry for that things went over time a bit. We appreciate it so much. But one last thing we can address, and I want to assure you that every comments you made throughout the webinar, we will take them seriously, especially if anything needs to be integrated into the course. But also I want to say that some of you asked earlier, this is a very important question, so I don't want to sort of lose track of it, because it's very connected to the theme of the series of the webinars for this for Baobab and for the spring. Some of you ask about what are the job prospects for research, and there are so many job prospects. Going back to the idea of connecting learning with earning, when you're a researcher, when you're able to use certain methods, you can work, of course, as an academic, the obvious one, and do academic work and researches, but you can work in administration at universities and many other institutions. Almost every institution requires some kind of research to understand itself and its relation with other employers and with the bigger world, with other competitors, with other people. And so then they always need different kind of researchers and research methods to be used. And so there's always a way to explore. You can work in healthcare and do research. You can do, depending on your area, of course, and depending on which direction you want to take. You can always do a lot of research with NGOs. I still do gigs here and there. I get asked a lot for short research projects all the time. I'm not always available to do them because sometimes they're far away, and depending on whether they cover travels or not, they have all kinds of stipulations, right? But they do exist. And once you begin doing it, you can apply it to so many areas. So, there are many areas where you can do research, but I think also importantly, if you're passionate about questions on research, you can also independently write and publish, at the same time while you're working and doing research for different parties. So there are many job prospects that exist, and not to mention, of course, government jobs that require research. And there are just so many, and you can at any given time find them. I don't know if my colleague Pauline has any thoughts to add to that question that I haven't covered.
Yeah, I feel you've covered everything. Like research opportunities are everywhere. Like what we also do in our daily work is also research. And like every organization has a research department, because they need to understand how maybe they can improve programming or different aspects within that organization. So I think it's everywhere.
Yeah,
that was a really important point to make. Thank you for remembering the question and connecting it to the theme of the overarching theme of the webinar series. And we're always, our users are always thinking about employment. And so that's a very important connection that you made.
And one quick thing also, depending on your skill set, you can also don't only look for a job title that says researcher. There are many different titles. I encourage you to explore the different job titles that could mean they would benefit from a researcher. For example, any job that says monitoring and evaluation, M&E, that could use a researcher to evaluate a program, to ask the right questions, to interview people, data analyst, data analysis, the data collection. There are many different job titles. So I encourage you to also be aware, which I'm sure many of you are, but just in case, because I mean, it took me some time for me to understand that some jobs don't say researcher, but they actually need a researcher, right? So just a small reminder. And yeah.
There's one final question if we have time, and then we can close, from Malik. Is it possible to conduct a similar study in another country, and what should be done differently when conducting such a study?
Yeah, maybe I can get started. I would say like it's possible, because again, it is based on literature. You have to, one thing that you must do, you are doing in another country, you have to review literature around in that country, like what has been written in that country. You have to be also aware of the context, and things you have to understand, like things might be different, but the way you've designed the kind of questions that you have, you can ask the same questions in different countries, for example, but you have to learn more about the context for the qualitative and even quantitative research. For example, even if like you are studying like education systems, like Kenyan education system is different from Uganda and Tanzania, although they are neighboring countries. The way their education is organized, all those things might affect or might influence, not affect, might influence the kind of findings that you get. So you have to like provide that context and also write those limitations in your study. And also in every study, maybe we did not mention that like it can never be perfect. So you have to also highlight what are some of the limitations of this study, what are some of the things that need to be studied or worked on by other researchers in the near future. Maybe Luis has something to add.
No, that's spot on. That's basically what I would say. So thank you so much, Dr. Pauline. And I'm so honored and happy that you were here with us today. I thank you so much for this wonderful time. And sorry we went over time, but we knew this was going to happen because we knew a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts were going to come. So we kind of planned for that. But thank you for staying with us this long. And it was truly a pleasure. And I hope to see you in future webinars as well. And I'm very grateful for everybody, Dr. Pauline, Sandra, Tiffany, everybody who helped and was with us today and helped us learn.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you in the next session, April 26th for Life as a CV. It's also new material, well, maybe repurposed from other webinars that Dr. Luis Yako has conducted, but it's going to be really exciting material and a topic that's always top of mind for everyone. So we look forward to having you join us then.